What up, guys and girls? It's Bobby,
And Sean.
and we're back, volume 5 or so
Yeah, we're back now. We're back-ish.
ish. Yeah, I'm working next weekend again, so a little more intermittent episodes. But as always, this week's episode is brought to you guys by 10,000. Use the code CronusFit15 for 15% off of your first order. 10,000 goes to help us with the podcast and also supports a pretty good brand. Pretty big fan of some of their apparel, shorts and t-shirts. Always good to train in.
Yeah, this is also going to be my last pod from New York City. I moved to Jersey City in a week and a half. So I think this should be like really focused on just how great this city is. If the listeners have not, uh, been made aware how great this city just really truly is, that's why I can't wait to leave.
Well, Jersey now has decriminalized weed.
Yeah, but I think it's still in the early stages of being able to do what Colorado has with generating tax revenue
Mm.
and legalizing it for generic purposes of
Recreational.
profit.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I don't think. Yeah, you're right. It's just decriminalized and it's not like recreational, or they don't sell it recreationally yet. But I can only imagine it's only a couple of years away where they set the infrastructure, and I can only imagine that Pennsylvania and New York will very shortly open that up again, open up to that as well.
I wonder when the country at large is going to decriminalize marijuana.
Who knows? I mean, nothing against it. I think, the Canadian or Canada is a pretty good example of like federal legalization. And, I think it's turned out pretty well for them. I mean, I don't really know. I just remember reading about how the Canadian Army and military are allowing, marijuana with certain like regulations over when you can do it. I think it's like you can't, smoke 24 hours before like driving a heavy vehicle, and you can't smoke like 3 days before learning the range or something like that.
I think one of the challenges for the military in making it legal in the United States, or for the military in general, with a breathalyzer, I just don't know what tests are out there to test if you are in fact high or have any like adverse side effects from the level of weed in your system
Mm.
within like that rapid of a turnaround. So, with a breathalyzer, you'd be like, oh, you're a point oh 0.06, like you're not supposed to be drinking on duty right now. I don't know where that testing right now is for marijuana. I mean, as soon as that comes out, I don't know why you wouldn't legalize it just in general, because then you can easily say you're a zero point oh 0.05 on the cannabis spectrum. Like you're too high to function.
Yeah, I don't think they have like a like point of care testing like they do with alcohol. I mean, I think it's just like kind of how you're performing. I don't know. And it's kind of that's very nebulous, but like yeah, there's definitely no test like to see how high you are besides like doing like a probably like sobriety test.
Yeah. And I look at the various strains of the marijuana that is out there, and I think it's different than comparing it to alcohol. Alcohol in general, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I just feel like has a pretty similar effect on people. Not to say that individuals don't get more drunk than others off of a single beer, but in general, alcohol will have the same effect. Whereas with the different strains of marijuana, you get some that are like super chill and relaxing. You get others that make you giddy. I don't know how they're going to be able to standardize weed across the board.
Yeah, and that's like another interesting, I think, like dynamic to bring up because that's gonna be the big thing. I think the federal legalization is gonna be like the regulation of type of strains, and then kind of like I would imagine like how big tobacco has theirs set up. So there's like debate about if it legalizes federally, like it would essentially drown out all these small like homegrown businesses, and you would just have like these big conglomerates and corporations around marijuana.
I just think it's really fascinating that marijuana is illegal, but there are other things that in my opinion, are way worse for you, that are completely legal. You know, alcohol, I think, has a way worse effect on your body, especially if you look at recovery for fitness. Um, smoking's horrendous for you. I mean, now it might pay off if you're in some states because if you're a smoker, you can get the COVID vaccine. But outside of that, you know, like what is the benefit? And I get smoking marijuana, smoking a cigarette, you're still inhaling something and you're still messing up your lung capacity probably in the long term. But why we have an opportunity for people to booze and smoke, but not just smoke weed, if the same effect is going to be poor lung performance and some sort of adverse effect on your psyche, that it just doesn't, it seems like they are the same thing to me.
No, I would agree too. I mean, like, you don't see people that, overdose or like drink themselves to death or like smoke themselves to death with pot. I mean, you get people that drink themselves to death with alcohol and then get like liver failure, et cetera, et cetera. Plenty of these people that I've seen in the hospital that have like liver failure from alcoholism, but you don't really see that with marijuana.
I think one of the other bad things that marijuana has going for it are the general advocates. Because whenever I think of someone who's smoking weed and getting high and hitting the doobie, it's your 1970s, 1980s, corporations are bad, man, and long, dirty hair, flannel shirts. Although I should
Hmm.
say I have a ton of flannels, and that's just, I think that's more of a soft thing. Um, but I don't understand why you don't really have a market of people coming out and saying, "No, I'm a normal functioning adult." We always associate the cookie cutter Karen to be, you know, staunchly against weed proliferation because you're just seeing like a dumbass on the other side as why weed is bad.
Yeah, I think it's that like that reefer madness culture from the '70s that has like
Hmm.
drastically changed public opinion on it. Because I mean, if you were like walk around, probably ask like random people that you see normally in society, you probably have a good amount that say that that they probably smoke recreationally or smoke every now and then. But they would never admit it because they don't want that stigma attached to being like a pothead. So
No.
I can only imagine like I think the last statistic was like 70% of Americans have like tried marijuana or something like that. I don't know if I'm making that up the statistic if I remember correctly, but there's a lot of people that have smoked and they're successful members of society without becoming like useless degenerates that just smoke weed all day.
Right. And then politically speaking, too, it's really challenging because you have people, for instance, like Vice President Harris has admitted to smoking weed in the past, yet she held a position in California where individuals were negatively impacted by the drug laws
Hmm.
and sentenced for, you know, the same thing that she did, albeit in a different situation, but where she was not caught and convicted for possession of marijuana. And so for politicians, I think they're in a very precarious position because if they were to come out and say that they're staunchly against weed or they're for weed, but then they have a history that says otherwise, now you're just going to see many more kind of social activists saying, why now? There's so many people whose lives you've essentially ruined.
Hmm.
Why should we trust you on this? Why are you all of a sudden becoming, you know, the cool aunt? I think that's a valid concern, but I think it's holding politicians back from really coming out and supporting this in larger numbers.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a very valid statement, especially like in how like law or like you talk about that brings up a point about like the legal, I guess, like penitentiary system and like how private prisons have benefited a great deal from these nonviolent drug offenses, and that's part of the um, decriminalization process with like New Jersey. They expunge all these records of like people that were jailed for drug possession charges, et cetera, which are like
Well, you look at people like President Biden. President Biden back in the, Jesus, he's been in politics for so long. Which decade is this? In the 80s and 90s, was all for both mandatory minimums on sentencing guidelines and in statutes, and then applying a quantity number as a sentencing factor for drugs really adversely affected tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of individuals that were busted with,
Mhm.
a gram of marijuana on them. And then it really also negatively impacted the people that weren't in charge of the drug distribution. I mean, when we first came out with the sentencing guidelines, the impact was supposed to be felt by kingpins, those individuals that you see now Netflix making shows on, and Narcos. But really, what it ended up doing is taking people that were too poor, that were kind of forced in these positions where they had to be a mule for these large drug quantities, and they were getting busted with drugs that they weren't really involved with manufacturing or producing. They were just that mule, and they were the ones facing 20, 30-year mandatory
Mhm.
sentences. And now you've got to look back, and it's been 2 to 3 years since we've had a quorum to go over US sentencing guidelines and make any adjustments as necessary. But I'm really shocked in the first 100 days we've not seen a major sentencing reform bill get proposed. And I think partially that's to do with President Biden's history as being such like a staunch advocate for this just say no dare kind of program, that he really kind of pioneered and led on the Democratic side.
I remember hearing something about how Trump was going to propose some was going to pass some bill like that, and that it was like shot down because the Democrats didn't want this bill passing under Trump, and Trump saying that. Did you hear about this? Or
Yeah, I feel like that came out within the last year of his
yeah,
presidency. It's supposed to be a major. I think he did get a reform bill passed, but
it's like
they're part of like these omnibus bills that go through Congress. Something
mhm.
had a provision like that, and I do remember reading that the Democratic side of the House did not want to come across the aisle to make it a victory for him.
Yeah, because it was like he didn't want him to have the political victory of, and that's like a fucking like a huge shame too. Like the
I mean, that's politics in general. If we take what's happening in Texas right now and what happened last week as an example, and then compare it to New York, it's all back to the whataboutism. You know, Cuomo gets accused of sexual harassment, covering up deaths, and now the Democrats are saying, what about Senator Cruz, someone who does not run the state of Texas, fleeing to go to Cancun for the weekend with his family? The two are completely dissimilar. They're similar in the extent that they're public representatives that did a horrible job managing a condition that they were placed under. But both sides are doing it. We really talked about it with the riots and what the Republicans were saying about the same kind of violent rhetoric on the Democratic front for the last 4 years, and now we're just seeing it in reverse. I mean, I really dislike the news because Fox will talk about one, CNN talks about the other, MSNBC's just off the charts deep end. Like, I think it's a terrible spot to be in as a viewer and as an average citizen, because where are you supposed to trust your news source is getting its information from, and what's being identified by producers as we're not talking about this or we are exclusively talking about this. It's really difficult to imagine we're getting a good positive flow of good facts.
yeah, and I think that probably is what is definitely contributing to kind of the general just stalled and culture in America these days, whereas everything is divided, or it seems like everything's divided, but if you talk to your neighbors, nobody is that crazy or that um that divided. It seems like everyone is like doing pretty well in everyday society, but the media paints a certain picture too.
Well, I think it's what sells. It's the clickbait. Anchorman 2, when they do the live update for the police chase, and all of a sudden that's the prime time news, uh, covering an OJ Simpson like escape. That's what people want to see. They want to see the gimmicky stories, or the gotcha, or the really extreme labeling on the bottom of the news ticker. That's what people care about. I think people wouldn't tune in to see pundits talk about generic state level government issues, which would probably be a benefit if people wanted to vote and actually take part in a democratic society.
Hmm. But speaking of the news, I saw that they're starting to expand the COVID vaccinations. We're almost at 100 million now in America.
We're at 100 million, or we're
We're getting
getting
close
there?
to 100 million. Yeah. Although I'm kind of mixed with that whole initiative, because apparently, Biden wants to do the 100 million vaccinations. They are supposedly going to mobilize the hospital staff to go give COVID shots, which I'm kind of very annoyed about because, it is literally taking this hospital and like shrinking its staff by like 50% to go support a vaccination drive where you could literally take privates like Joe, like to get 11 Bravo and teach them how to do vaccinations. Like you don't need to take nurses and like doctors out of the hospital to go give vaccinations. It's kind of
Do you think it's more
ridiculous.
of an image thing, like a publicity stunt? I mean, like
100%.
yeah, that see that's bad too, because it's like if there's an actual national emergency where we need the docs, to be doing surgery, now you're taking that away from a planning consideration.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think it's just like an OER bullet that I hate to say it, but like the hospital commander who's like a med service corps like med service officer who's never like been a doctor who has only done like hospital like been like a
Right.
hospital manager essentially who's making these decisions based on the hospital and then like essentially gutting the hospital for what ultimately is going to be an OER bullet saying that facilitate the vaccination of several hundred thousand American
Yeah.
citizens. Yeah.
That I mean, but that goes back to our discussion on once you make field grade and you start ranking up to that 05, 06 level, you're so detached from reality that at that point you're just looking to write that OER bullet that the guys are going to absolutely hate you for. I kind of in the same light that we're talking about, it's why I always appreciated knowing that if we had like a rotary wing attachment on a mission, if one of the guys that was flying was like a prior service ranger, because
Mm,
a lot of rangers will go warrant and become pilots, like they know exactly what you need on the ground, like they understand what point of the mission you're in. And I'm not saying that other regular pilots don't understand that, but there is a
perspective.
huge difference that I've learned and I've seen from pilots with ground experience versus the ring knockers that were top 5% at West Point and just happened to get 64s.
Yeah, I was just like, I think that's also like the same thing I've noticed in the hospital administration. It's like when you have administrators who were physicians or, had some clinical experience, they understand like what it means to how to provide services like clinical services but if you just have essentially like a pencil pusher that is working as an administrator, then you have decisions that are based purely on numbers and purely on like financials rather than based on clinical outcomes. And that's a huge, I think, flaw with healthcare systems in America today, is that a lot of healthcare systems are now run by MBAs or business people and not run based on clinicians or like physicians who you know the perspectives are drastically different if you talk about like financial incentives versus doing the right thing for patients and maximizing clinical care and that sort of thing.
Well, that's the exact same kind of argument almost every single organization probably faces. Ranger Regiment, are you a first time officer there as a company commander candidate, or were you there as a PL? Did you grow up there enlisted, or did you come in later? I think the standard is always what the standard is, but I think there's almost more expected of you if you don't have that background walking in, knowing when to really take more advice from those around you and listen to your subordinates first coming in and just thinking off the top that you're going to run things the exact same way because you just see it as the same standard organizational flow and the same reporting metrics. I think it's really dangerous when there's not any experience from that ground level at senior management positions.
Yeah, and that's, I think I didn't really appreciate it as much in the military and in the army, because I guess I never really exposed to that side of the house, or seeing like how decisions are made at the like 05, 06 level, and how it propagates down to the unit level. Like being in the hospital and then seeing kind of the conversations that are held, and seeing like how different people have different perspectives on like on providing clinical services. And so it becomes very readily apparent in my mind how like the decisions made at the 06 level can rapidly propagate down, and then cause you know issues down at the lower levels.
Yeah. And so we are a fitness podcast. So I'm going to take this to fitness with that same theme. This is why I could not stand when Dave Castro would program for the Open. I want someone to program for the Open like a Josh Bridges, like an actually fit Navy SEAL, not Dave Castro, who catbacks at 315 on a deadlift, who I don't think could power clean, uh, let alone front squat 155. You want someone that's making decisions, that's directing this kind of thing, to have that experience. So what's your take with the Open coming up? Do you think we're going to see workouts that are just kind of tailored towards his favorite kind of CrossFit athletes, or, just a standard Dave Castro, you know, random built for short people
I mean, like,
workouts?
I think the CrossFit Open workouts have been pretty good, pretty well programmed. To be honest, I think they've always been relatively decent tests of fitness and etc. It'll just be curious to see how they do this year with only 3 week system, and then it's like the limited supply of equipment and stuff. So it'll be kind of interesting to see, how that plays out. I'm expecting it to do terribly this year, but I also like saw that the open registration for this year is absolutely trash, like down like 50% or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable when so many gyms are closed. I'm saying from the perspective of a workout that looks like a 9 minute to 12 minute, just quick AMRAP, or like standard WOD. I feel like we haven't had grinders. I want to see like a 40 to 60 minute workout
That'll never
for the
happen.
Open. But I mean, that's the same thing that, Pat Vellner a couple years ago was saying when he was cut. I guess, was that 2 years ago at the games? Where it just seemed like they started doing the standard CrossFit workouts after things that really
Um,
just were not, like, I think, indicative of total overall kind of fitness. It was just cardio, cardio, cardio type thing. I'm
yeah,
saying I would love to see if in the Open, if you're going to have that in the first stages of the CrossFit Games, you should have that as one of the workouts. Maybe week 4, week 5, you have to do a 10K row for time, like something simple like that. Everyone can get on a rower, or you have to. I think running would be really difficult. I think rowing or assault bike workouts would probably be the easiest. But I want to see a 35, 40 minute suckfest.
yeah. I mean, that'd be an interesting thing, but who knows how they're gonna program it? Um, we'll see. I do have a suspicion they'll do like a strength component workout, like the one workout was, I think, like 15 or 16, where there was like a 10 to 1 of like of the dumbbell and burpees, and then like a remainder of time you do like a max clean and jerk.
Oh yeah. Well, they also have that too with the ladders, where it went up to like a 315 clean, where it was like a descending ladder by like 2 or 4 reps every single round, with like an increasing set of
Yeah,
muscle
yeah,
ups, or
yeah.
yeah,
Some I imagine something like that, where they'll have some strength component tied in with like the metabolic.
that's one of those workouts. Instead of seeing, for instance, to go back to what I want to see, have a standard workout be, do this exercise, and prescribed weight for men is going to be 225 for, say, deadlifts, and you're gonna blow yourself up with deadlifts, burpees, muscle ups, right? But then there should be a second workout, and instead of increasing the weight, where it goes 255, 275, just have it be you have 4 minutes to clean 315. Once you clean 315, then we're gonna increase and you're going into the second buy-in workout. But if you don't even get there, I'm not even gonna have you bother
Mm.
trying to climb this ladder. And so that we see 80% of males between 18 to 24 were able to hit 265 and have it be this weird. I think at that point,
Oh no.
that's only ODP.
He just pooped.
Oh. But I mean, at that point, what I'm seeing is we're just doing this so that people can have
Oh my god.
a more definitive score on the CrossFit Games for the 99%.
I'm gonna have to cut back to you in a little bit. Can we take a break? I gotta get back. I gotta clean this poop up.
Yeah, we'll take like a couple-minute break for everyone. Bobby got a new dog, and
He just
we'll
pooped behind me.
meet him when we come back.
Pause.
I'm gonna keep.
All right, we're back, guys. Sorry about that little bit of delay. My new puppy apparently has worms now because he just pooped in the study, and this poop was writhing with worms.
Come on,
gagging.
you don't have to describe it again.
Gagging right now. So I guess next thing we're gonna take him to the vet soon, but kind of grossed me out for a little bit, and that's one thing that's always grossed me out, no matter what medicine, like everything in medicine, nothing really grosses me out in medicine besides like worms.
Yeah, they're weird.
Worms gross me out.
Yeah, I don't know much about medicine to be grossed out by much more, but like I was just saying broken arms kind of freak me out. Like, or just seeing like a broken limb, but where it's not a compound fracture, where it's just you could see distorted, and that's not right.
Oh, what like lifting injuries kind of sketch me out. Like lifting injuries.
Yeah. When I saw my wrist not looking the right way, that was weird.
Yeah. What were we talking about? I'm sorry. It's the Open. We're talking about the Open.
CrossFit Games programming. We should have a ladder. All right, we'll just skip that. ACFT. What the hell is going on in the Army? I thought we were supposed to have this cure-all to the gender fitness standard issue, to branch specific, and like now it's going back to a hidden gender rating score metric for evaluations. Do you know any more about that?
Yeah, it was kind of I seen that article that Kristen Grice wrote about how they're proposing to add on the gender, adding on gender, but even she said like it's a terrible idea, and that it decreases lethality, and then it actually ends up increasing like divide, like a gender divide between genders. So it was like kind of interesting to see her perspective on things, given that she's the first female Ranger School graduate and like the first female infantry officer, and even she said that like she failed the ACFT, but she has since trained for the ACFT and now is doing well on it. But it's just like it's a good point. It highlights how like even that you have to like train for the test, and like not everyone's gonna do great on it at the first time go.
Yeah, one of my other groups of friends, we were talking about this, and they sent like this snapshot, and I'll read what this former battalion commander of I'll have to get down to. He was like of a heavy arms combined battalion, one of those armored dudes. Two flawed assumptions in this piece. One, the ACFT is a good measure of personal fitness for combat. Okay, I could see that if you're like super stupid fit, but in general, what PT test really is the best measure. And two, we are in a place where our level of physical fitness is going to put us at risk of defeat on the battlefield. And again, he said these are both flawed assumptions. So on the first one, I think we've talked about how the ACFT, the scores are super low and we think they could be higher. But in general, outside of the RPAT, I mean, what really are we supposed to be doing? We can't take these people to combat and just be like, all right, now you have the stress. Now do deadlift or lift this body up. Like, I think you have to accept some flaws in a system, but in general, still train for the same event.
Yeah. I actually the sergeant major Grinston, his Instagram account is actually surprisingly well informed. Is very pretty informing. I was reading something on his Instagram story where he said that with the APFT had about 40% predictive value of like, dealing okay, or like I can't remember what the outcome was, whether that was like warrior skills or survivability in combat or something. It's like a 40% predictability, whereas the ACFT has like a 70% predictability of like, doing of better outcomes in combat. So from that metric alone, you can argue that the ACFT prepares or is a better predictor for future success in combat. Which I would wholeheartedly echo that statement. Like, if you're able to deadlift, if you have the speed, power generation, you have core strength, and all the other things that the ACFT tests, which the APFT does not. I think that's a pretty good predictor of whether or not you can, do well in combat or not.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Are there things in the ACFT that I think are silly that should be replaced with maybe a heavy med ball clean instead of like throwing the little, wall ball over your head, um, as if you're like picking up a heavy ammo can or weird object onto the top of a
Yeah.
HESCO. But yeah, I think the bigger issue I have with this dude's piece is we're in the flaw is we are in a place where our level of physical fitness is going to put us at risk of defeat on the battlefield. I would I would say we're probably pretty close to that. Uh, Having been in a light infantry brigade, having been in a heavy arms unit as well, I was never impressed with the fitness level, or the lack thereof, knowing what kind of like really strenuous physical acts that I got to experience in Ranger Battalion that I don't think 90% of those formations would be able to complete.
Yeah, no, I'd agree too. And it's like you have to be pretty disconnected from, your lower levels if you're in like a senior commander that, thinks that the APFT is a good predictor of fitness and that, the army is like excelling at fitness. Which, I'm pretty sure the army is not excelling at fitness.
No, a couple years ago, we had that discussion where, in general, trying to recruit soldiers into the army was suffering because we have an obesity epidemic in the United States. It's not like the army, once you get in, isn't suffering from the same issues. This dude went on to further state, we did pretty well in Iraq and Afghanistan after fueling our bodies with nothing but Rip It and 2 trips to the 31 flavors bar. Fitness wasn't the problem then, isn't the problem now. That sounds like someone who rode in vehicles on every single mission or was a fobbit.
Yeah.
Like zero. You know what was banned when we would go on dismounted patrols was Rip It. That was an awful fuel source. And the 31 flavors, but I don't even, that sounds like literally something you would go to the boardwalk to get.
Hmm.
So if you're really out and about, going back to CAF for a vacation, that's the only time you could hit up any kind of one of those. And then the guy goes on to say that diversity is important because a diverse workforce. I think attacking what Kristen really doesn't discuss at all, being that having less fit individuals that bring other things to the fight is just as advantageous as having a huge super fit individual. This is probably the same dude that would say that we only hire or promote individuals that are fit, and that's like the downside of fitness being a metric too. I think this person is fully incorrect.
No, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if you open up have the MOS specific like standards for like MOSs and that is gender neutral, I think that, levels the playing field for everybody involved. And then you have not equity, but you have equality, the difference between equality versus equity, and that everybody has the same ability to do whatever they want, but they don't have the same outcomes. And then, we can't strive for equal outcomes because that would be, um, you know, not the ideal solution.
The other thing that one of my buddies says is, the dude's comments are just indicative of the problem we have where we're okay with losing and blaming it on someone else. And I think that's a really great point, because this guy just seems to be highlighting that our fitness is fine, like we're going to be able to do things, but we have so many other issues that we should be considering, and so we can really take the focus off the ball. I mean, like, COVID's a bad thing happening in the military, and I know a lot of soldiers are pissed off that they're going to JRTC at the height of COVID. But the things to consider is Russia, China, the Al Qaeda, ISIS's around the world. Are they all pushing pause to wait for the United States to get over the pandemic? And then furthermore, I'm not in the military anymore, but how many people have died from COVID in the Army? I mean, is that something that we know, where it's like, yeah, like we've got just as bad of a rate for mortality as the regular population does? I feel like it's significantly lower. And so, why shouldn't maybe the argument be made that you should still be, fighting the nation's wars? You should still be actively going out and getting after it with fitness and going to ranges. Like, that's something that I've not understood, seeing some of the complaining on some of these pages.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like twofold. I think it comes down to a little bit of, like, level of, like, not like, I guess, information and how much you know about kind of what's been going on. But at the same time, though, like, in you know, the army has in the past dealt with, like, health issues and like outbreaks of diseases and what have you. But at the end of the day, like, the enemy doesn't care about that. Like, you might, for the vast majority of guys in the army or the military, you're gonna be fine and not get sick. You probably don't even know you have it for the most part. And I think it's
Yeah.
like, you might say that for families that might be a little bit more difficult if you're like going home to your family afterwards. But like for got dudes in the barracks, like, I get it. And I
Yeah,
see
I
both sides.
Yeah, I absolutely think that's a great point you bring up, where, I'm focusing on the priority being maintaining a fit fighting force, and then bringing in that behind the fit fighting force is a family unit. And so exposing them to a level of risk that they necessarily really did not sign up for.
Mhm.
I think in a broader societal context, we can kind of compare this to teachers being fearful of going back. Um, and not signing up for putting themselves on that kind of a risk line. But at the end of the day, you just wonder, what is the military going to suffer long term from an inability to really lock down a physical standard that is gender neutral, that it's really refocusing the aim on being combat ready and proficient? And are we going to now be behind potentially other nations that understood the risk and were more willing to take that risk?
Yeah, I think that's, well, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really know, like, if that's like we'll never know, we'll never
Right.
know with that statement. But you have to imagine, like, Russia or China is probably like, or Korea, North Korea for that matter, probably don't really care about that consideration, and are willing to, for all intents and purposes, lose some guys to continue training.
Yeah, they're willing to play with fire, I think, a little bit more freely than we certainly do. I think also that goes back to the military being the volunteer service force. Maybe if we were just conscripting people, where it was mandatory, you'd have leaders that wouldn't care as much. But because people are volunteering, you're taking maybe a little bit more consideration into decisions that you're making that are going to impact health or their morale. But I just think it's we make a lot of excuses, having been in the military, for like why systems fail, or why things happen. I see the ACFT as being this really big one right now, and a lot of it just seems to come down to a leg tuck. Like, of all the things on the ACFT, the one thing is why can't you do a single leg tuck? I think I could do a leg tuck single armed. Like, what
Easily,
is preventing people from doing that?
I think it's just like people just, it's a new test, and ultimately people I think, have the opinion that, like, hey, if we keep failing this, they're going to change the test so that we can pass it. I think there's a component of that, and there's a component of people that are just, don't want to put in the time and effort to get better at something too. Which,
Well, they were talking about the plank being an alternative. I think the sergeant major's Instagram was talking, because someone made a comment, it's too difficult for people to do, and the plank was going to be an alternative, and the standard would be like 2 minutes.
Hmm.
Those tests seem not the same. One is testing, I think, your core and your balance. The other one is, I think, more indicative of actual strength, being able to pull yourself up and bring your knees to, your elbows into your chest on a half a pull-up. I've never understood why the leg tuck was super difficult. I never will, but I don't understand why we can't train for it. I mean, it's not like this hasn't been announced for 2+ years for units to prepare.
Oh yeah, no, that's 100% the thing. Is like you have had plenty of time to learn how to do a pull-up.
And I think it's also, Kristen brought up an excellent point about being one of the first female Ranger school graduates, being one of the first female infantry officers. We're all about making sure that people have equal access to be successful in the military. I mean, the Army has made, since the time my mom was in to now, is making huge leaps and jumps to make sure that people can be successful no matter where you come from or who you are. But to artificially kind of create a standard now for females, I feel like we're walking backwards, where instead we should be walking forwards. Either make the standard branch specific, or just send a message to society that you have to be physically fit to do this job. Like, you can't be successful and be overweight in the Army. It's not possible.
Yeah, but I think it's like people just want an easier, just be not to struggle at work for things too.
Yeah, and it goes back to, though, I've met some like really in shape individuals that I thought were awful officers, awful soldiers. They were just really meatheads. They were really good at lifting weights, but they didn't take that focus or that discipline and apply it to being a professional soldier. But those were few and far between. I have seen significantly more awful officers that were also failures when it came to managing their personal fitness. That was something that I typically saw hand in hand. If you were overweight, I could guarantee, or usually maybe I was prejudiced because you'd run into so many of them, you were not a high performer in the military. And it like would go all the way back to ROTC when you're trying to branch different, parts of the Army. It was like everyone that was like the high performing, really physical individual wanted to go to one of like maybe 5 branches. All the people that were kind of physical duds went to a lot of your support branches. And then like the Army didn't really do a great job, I think, of saying, no, like you're a high performer, but you have to go, do the logistics kind of thing. Not to say there aren't fit logistics people out there, but speaking from a generalization.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned this before in the past, but it's like if you can be physically fit, um, or like I think what was the analogy we used? It was like a Venn diagram of like you can be fit. It's hard to be a good leader if you're not physically fit, but it's easier to be a good leader if you are physically fit. I think it's to summarize what I think we talked before in the past.
Yeah, one of my buddies said that like fatigue makes cowards of us all.
Hmm.
It's the mental mind game thing. Uh, when you were training for your ultra last year, training for my Ironman now, I mean, there are times where I had to do a 4-hour bike and then an off the bike run this past week. I think I hit like 2:45 or 3 when I just started getting both bored and started like settling into, some saddle pain, some discomfort from being, in a tucked arrow position and just being like, why am I doing this? And then you just got to like push through it, because it's
Hmm.
that kind of mental preparation that applies well beyond fitness. And I think that's what people that don't do fitness or take fitness seriously are missing. They don't have that adversity, and that's tied to actual physical pain. Everything is just, conjectural for them.
Yeah, and I think anyone that does like fitness or like has done any of our workouts, especially with like the Saturday Suck Fest, like how many times like when you do that workout, how many times you want to quit, but then you have the mental discipline and determination to continue and finish the workout. That same like determination and like discipline and this perseverance will, push you through, um, you know, it will apply to everyday life when you get those like hard moments where you're tired or, fatigued, and you just kind of push through it and move on and get and complete the mission or complete whatever your thing is.
Yeah. And speaking of completing the mission, we talk about like, is there an easy button? When you're working out, and to kind of shift what we were talking about before we jumped on the podcast, but if you have a certain shoe, is that going to make overcoming that obstacle easier? If you have a certain piece of equipment in your kit bag, is that going to make it easier for you? For instance, people always wanted, what was that ruck brand? Was it Taylor that everyone,
Tactical Tailor.
yeah, like everyone wanted the Tactical Tailor brand ruck, which was like the super sexy, like $400. I think you could get it because it was like modular and you could, do whatever you wanted to it. I was like, well, the Alice can do the exact same thing. I did not like the Alice when I first got it, but once I learned how to configure the Alice to fit my back, my shoulders, I loved, the Molly. I love my Molly ruck. Like I thought it was super comfortable for low distribution. Same thing, like go purchase a $50 old large Alice ruck, but these, a lot of junior officers at IBOLC, when we first got to the unit, when they were training for SFS, were like, I'm going to buy this like $400 ruck. It's like, well, that $400 ruck might be comfortable for a little bit, but you're still going to run into the same issues 3 hours in when your shoulders are screaming, and you still have to move your legs.
Yeah, I think it's like it's like a mental trap people fall into, and it's like if you think that you spending more money for something equates to better outcomes. It's
Yeah.
just like a mental trap. Same thing with like working out or like the gear or supplements. It's like the more money that you spend into these like extra, to these little extras, are going to equate with better outcomes, better success in the future. But at the end of the day, like the amount of money you spend on like gear isn't necessarily going to predict the amount of success you're going to have in the future. It's really how much work you put in, and putting the work in is what is going to predict success.
Yeah. We talk about shoes, for instance. My first pair of lifting shoes I got were the Romuleos from Nike,
Hmm.
and like a complete waste of money in my opinion, because one, I was not that good at lifting to really understand or appreciate the design. I ended up getting like the Reeboks like a couple years later, which were like half the price, and I got the exact same thing out of them. But every single year, Nike and Reebok release the new Metcons or the new Nanos. It's like they're the exact same thing, and for from a running shoe perspective, once I get 400 to 500 miles on my pair of shoes, I get a new pair. I don't see how just doing the basic movements puts that much stress on your shoe compared to a 400 miles on a running shoe that needs to be updated every year for CrossFit.
Hmm. No, I agree. Like I still have like a pair of
Like,
Metcon
what's your
fours.
take on that? Like,
I would say like
yeah,
I've got a pair of Metcon fours still that I update my shoes maybe once a year after they fall apart. But like, there's really no reason to have multiple shoes besides the fact that, you just might like the look, but the performance is going to be negligible on like a shoe, on like a wrap, on on any of the gear that you might think that you might need.
well, it's like all the gearheads that we've talked about in other podcasts where they buy the belt to put a, you know, the for their mag drops off their kit. They have, these really sexy chest rigs that they don't need. They try to look the part for some dude in SOF, where they try to buy the same stuff that Matt Fraser has instead of like doing the work to get to that same position. Um, yeah, like I really want like this. These bikes are thousands of dollars for Aero, uh, from a couple different brands for Ironman. But it's like I have a road bike where I can just clip on Aero bars, and if I want to invest in a power meter for the pedals, I can, and I will get probably the exact same out of that bike that I would
Mhm.
spending 4 times as much on a bike that I will ride. maybe twice a year for competition like that. It's just one of those, you have to have, I think, some maturity going into an event to understand the work is what you put into it, not really the gear that you're wearing that defines your success.
Yeah, that's 100% like that's a great perspective to have, and I think you just get that with maturity too. Like I'm sure when you're younger and you think, or just with social media too, you like look at people on Instagram or what have you that are like these super fit individuals, and they're trying to sell you like a product or sell you a program. And rarely is it ever that one singular thing that you want to spend money on that's going to actually predict your success or have your results. It's like the amalgamation of hard work, determination, consistency, perseverance, etc. Those things are what's going to predict success and having success for you in the long run, not like a
Yeah.
singular piece of equipment or singular program.
No, I think that's something that has changed probably in the last 20 years as social media has really taken off and people go from emulating their idols on the process, trust the process that got them there, and are instead just focusing on what that really quick feedback loop tells them they need in order to get there. And they're getting out of playing outside type things, and they realize that, oh, why spend an hour doing this when I can get the same workout in 25 minutes, like 6-minute abs, like I'm good. I think that was like the whole start of this transformation to the item that I have is going to make or break me.
Yeah, and I think that's a maturity thing, and just like kind of a product of today's society where I do. It's the same idea. Like growing up, it's like Americans want it, like faster. They want it now, etc. But I think it just only that perspective has only been exacerbated by it's technology and like Amazon, things like that, where you want something from Amazon, you can get it the next day, and then that's like the expectation that anything that you want, you can get it, with very minimal effort and get it the next day.
I think Louis C.K. had a stand-up bit where he was saying when he grew up, not hearing from your friends or family for a couple days was normal. You had to wait to call. If someone was on the phone, you might get a letter.
Mm-hmm.
And now he hears people getting pissed off on 5G if their text message doesn't go through instantaneously thousands of miles across the world to someone else's cell phone and register a read receipt. Like that's where we are, where the expectation is you get that gratification simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they would, take away the like function, for instance, from social media. I think that would be phenomenal. Just post a photo and that's it. Get what you need from it. But I don't need to see that 20 people liked it, 50 people, because everything is, if 50 people like your photo and you have 20,000 followers or 60,000 followers, like clearly you purchased that following, and that says something more about you too. Like that's the society we live in. I sound like a boomer right now. Holy shit.
But it's true though. I mean, these are all valid perspectives to have, especially nowadays where, but I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of valid today, I started watching Heavyweights again last night. Which two things blew my mind. One, that movie could never be made today. And two, Disney would never make that movie. That was a Disney movie. I was shocked to hear the jokes that were being made. That for those of you that haven't seen Heavyweights, if you're a younger generation, it's about a kid going to a fat camp that Ben Stiller buys for the purposes of manufacturing an infomercial based on running these, adolescent kids through a fitness regime for, the duration of the summer. And then, hilarity ensues, just like every 90s movie. That movie would not fly today. I think 60% of America is obese, so there'd be a lot of trigger warnings.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's like, kind of a product of, I don't even know, like, because I mean, people were fat back then too in the 90s, but probably wasn't like as nearly as many as there are today, I guess. And then maybe it was like a smaller minority. I don't know. Maybe people just weren't as triggered as easy back then too. I don't know.
I don't know what it was. I think with dieting and fitness kind of changing, and the idea that when you went on a diet, and if you were on the diet for 3 months, 6 months, and you lost the weight, that you could go back, and that whole yo-yo effect started happening, and people lost faith in healthy, clean eating because they thought that they couldn't actually maintain something like that for the duration of their life. Um, Back then, I just don't. I feel like heavy people were portrayed by Chris Farley. It was,
Hmm.
if you're fat, you're supposed to be like kind of the fat funny friend, and you got stereotyped as being lazy. I know I sent that article to you about some people being overweight and not being categorized as obese people, but people with obesity, and now they're the vaccine is available for them just because of their BMI. I think society has gone way further to the left, making it more of a victim complex for being obese, rather than in the 90s it was seen as more of this is a you thing. Don't blame society for a physical failure.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of just, I don't know how the perspective has shifted so much to nowadays, but it's like that applies to like everything now, where it's like everybody, you can't, joke about certain things. It's like taboo to talk about certain topics, and I don't know, maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Who knows? But you know, it's like the classic boomer mentality that was always better back in my day.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but for instance, like politically speaking, I think Andrew Yang made fun of Donald Trump's weight
Mm-hmm.
on the campaign trail, like, a year or two ago. And now people are upset with him, I think, wanting to run for mayor of New York City, bringing up the fact that he is fat phobic. Like that's the degree that we're dealing with now. I mean, because it is, how do you deal with it? How do you make what is just so common now to see with obesity and not normalize that and just remind people that it's unhealthy? And then you have people that's saying no, it's not unhealthy. In fact, you can't tell physical fitness, or you can't tell health from a person's outer appearance. Like, I feel like we're going to start getting to a dangerous place where, because as a nation we are so obese, that we are going to really write off the adverse physical effects 20, 30 years down the line, again because of that immediacy that we're focusing on. The next 5 years I'm fine to be fat, but it's when you get to your 40s and 50s and the increased risks, like nobody's
Mm-hmm.
going to want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's just like that. Maybe willful ignorance, or um, I don't know, the lack of perspective on the future that, is kind of indicative of today's society, where it's like all we worry about, I think about is like the now, but we don't really think about the long-term effects, or, have the perspective to consider, the overall and, long-term effects of that.
Who's the guy that was in Superbad? uh
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill, yeah. I mean, I also think too there's a completely different standard for men and women.
Hmm.
um and I think largely the obesity, not epidemic, the wolf ignorance piece, I think that's driven by like the pop stardom. People started speaking negatively about it in the 90s and early 2000s, when the whole like super thin Victoria's Secret model was a thing. You had Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, that were overly sexualized as teenagers, and then as adults, people focusing on their body types. And so people said, okay, for female empowerment, shift to every body is positive. Men haven't gone through that.
Hmm.
Like, we keep putting up on posters women that are overweight, healthy, quote unquote beautiful. I don't see the same thing for people like Jonah Hill. In fact, Jonah Hill just had an article published about him where he was surfing with his shirt off, and there were like a ton of negative comments. Like, you would not see that for women. I think it's a double standard. I think it's dangerous because it's a part of society that you're protecting, but then everyone still wants Chris Hemsworth when they go home.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you know, I don't know. This is like getting a little too political correct for me. I don't know. say something that I'm gonna regret saying something.
No, but I mean, I think our listeners understand there's a health risk to it, and it's just I don't know where we come from, because even with COVID, going back to COVID, being obese is significantly worse for you. I think you're twice as likely to die, 4 times as likely or something to be hospitalized while being obese. But in the last year, we have not talked about obesity. Neither Fox nor CNN, nobody has contributed a long segment to, we now have an independent variable get introduced to the system, being a pandemic, and look what it did to every single one of the control groups. Like, it was way worse for the obese control group, like that. And the fact that we're not talking about health in general from that perspective because of the fear of offending others, I think is like really dangerous for society. Like, increased costs for healthcare are going to go and skyrocket. Like, just because we have drugs that can prolong your life with all these ailments doesn't mean that you should be fine with taking them. Like, there are healthier steps that are going to, burden hospital systems less and burden your pocket even more.
Yeah, that's the thing that, like, when people talk about like Medicare for all or universal healthcare system, I think that's one of the, biggest, largest threats to that idea, is that there is a large percent of America that essentially has a chronic illness, and that, for people like, for us or better, otherwise healthy individuals that go to the doctor, maybe once a year just for a yearly checkup and don't have any other chronic issues, no medications they currently take, that ends up that it's essentially a tax on the healthy, if you think about it that way. If you do like a Medicare system for all, or like the healthy are getting taxed more for the people who are unhealthy or unwell, or people that don't have the uh, discipline or the ability to live healthy lifestyles. And it's just like, it's not a sustainable system, and like, it's not really a perfect system either.
Yeah. And I have no problem with people making their own choices. I think, like, it's clear inside the military, you should not be overweight. You can't be overweight, because at the end of the day, that's going to affect my friends. It affected me if you couldn't pick me up and move me as a casualty. In regular society, if you don't want to work out, I don't care. If you want to, eat poorly, I don't care. If you're fine with, dads out there having that dad bod look, I don't care. It does not impact my life. I think, people in general should not really care. But when we have major pandemics being exacerbated, and death tolls increasing at an alarming rate with, one really kind of particular focus group, like, that then does impact me, because more shutdowns, we have to take more drastic steps to curb an illness that may be artificially higher because of a factor that we don't want to acknowledge.
I think that's a very, very dangerous, or the elephant in the room that, people don't want to talk about for fear of, like you said, offending people or calling people out. But at the same time, though, like, I can, kind of appreciate that, maybe wellness and fitness is kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It is a what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, like, it's something that, that not everyone has. That it is something that only well-off people. What's the word I'm looking for?
I'm not a wordsmith, man.
Yeah,
But I
it's
know what
like,
you mean. I mean, like, because there's so many other factors that impact health. I mean, like,
yeah,
if you're in a food, fruits and vegetables, if I think, like, income is definitely a thing with eating healthier and being able to shop at stores that have those healthy alternatives. I'm not discounting any of that, but it's just I don't like seeing people, being adversely impacted by something that could probably be curbed with, just education. And it goes back to schools then. Like, how many PE classes have been cut um, as one of the things that schools are taking away? How many gym teachers are gone? How much physical activity are kids growing up learning? Uh, learning about different, muscle pathway systems and doing the mile run in PT, like that's the kind of stuff you take away. It's going to be hard to reinforce.
No, that's very, yeah. And it's like, I see both sides from it. It's like, it's like, people that, don't have access to like healthy food or the fitness or the gyms. And then, you were essentially saying that, you need to be healthier without having access to healthy care or healthy food. It's like, shaming a cancer patient for having cancer. It's like kind of that. But that's only like I would say like a minority of people who are overweight who lack that access or education. But for like the vast majority of Americans who are overweight, they, for the most part, have the capability to live healthier or make better decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you just be fine with the inherent risk. That comes with being overweight, with cancer rates, with heart issues, with everything that happens with more increase in fatty tissue. But it's one of those things that if you're in the fitness world, like I think we are, it's just it's almost like a matter of fact that you deal with, and people make huge jumps and leaps, and they empower themselves through these physical programs they follow, and then it's great, and you're happy to see it, and just in general, if society's happy, then you really can't complain.
But that's what I said about like having a fat, dumb society that's easier to control too. But that's like a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
No. I'm gonna start swimming, I think, in the Hudson River here when I move to Jersey, near like Ellis Island, Statue of Liberty. I think it's clean. I've researched it a bit.
You start swimming in the Hudson?
I've got a wetsuit. Yeah. I need
Ooh.
to do some open water. I'm just worried about running into like a diaper from like,
Ooh.
yeah, from seeing Hitch. Like that's my fears, hitting a diaper. That and sharks. It's weird. I don't feel like there are sharks really in the Hudson. But I'm terrified of sharks.
Interesting. That you're afraid of sharks. That's like better, you have a better chance of getting stung by a bee than getting bit by a shark.
Okay, well, I'm fine with getting a bee sting. I'm not fine with losing my leg.
You'd be okay. I don't think they'd bite your leg off.
I know a surgeon, right? So if I lose part of it, I know who's going to take it off cleanly for me.
Yeah, I'd be more worried about the infection that you get from the Hudson River rather than the shark bite.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a pill for that, right? So
Vibrio is a terrible, terrible infection to get. Don't have any open sores when you go swimming. It'll fuck you up. You will get messed up.
All right, fine. I'll find a lake. I'll find a lake or a small creek.
Yeah, I'd be very, very aware or wary of weird bacterial and pathogens in open water.
Oh, that's disgusting. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, just for as your friend in healthcare.
As my doctor.
But yeah, I think we'll kind of start wrapping with that. Sorry for the jumble in the middle. I'm actually kind of worried with my dogs, and now has worms. So I'm just thinking that he pooped downstairs right now, and there's worms just crawling around in our living room. So that'll be something to look forward to as I go downstairs after this.
Oof. Well, good luck with taking care of him, man.
Yeah, I didn't do that. Ugh. Gross.
All right, bro. Well, I will talk to you in a couple weeks from the Dirty Jers.
All right, man. Enjoy the move. Jersey
Bye.
is probably better than I would prefer Jersey over the city.
Oh yeah, hell yeah. I can't wait to move.
All right. See ya.
Peace.
Until next time. Peace.